Hello and welcome to the third part of this review guide. In this, we're going to be talking about some of the deductive reasoning, law of detachment, law of syllogism, and some symbol stuff. So let's go ahead and get started with that. In the first part, it says write each sentence in symbolic form using the given symbols. So the test is easy, is considered P, Sam studies is Q, and Sam passes the test is R. So just some things I'll put in the margin as reminders. The symbols we know are the arrow, which means if then. So if you see a sentence with if and the word then, we're going to be using an arrow. There's this thing which means and there's this thing that means or, and then there's this double arrow that means if and only if. Oh yeah, and this one, negate or not. So those are the symbols we've gone over. So I'm going to be in each of these questions using one or more of these symbols. I don't know if I'll use them all, but those are all the ones we did. So here we go. If the test is easy, then Sam will pass it. So I am seeing an if then. That does mean that I'm going to be using that arrow. So if the test is easy, then Sam will pass. It looks like that's it. There's no ands, ors, if and only ifs, or negations. There's like no word not or anything. So it's just going to be if the test is easy, which was P, arrow, then Sam will pass the test, which is R. And that's it for the first one. The next one says Sam will pass the test if and only if he studies. So this time it has the if and only if, which, as I wrote over here, is the double-sided arrow. So I will have a double-sided arrow. Excuse me. Then it says Sam will pass the test, which is R, followed by he studies, which is Q. And that is the answer to 32. And the next one, it looks like it is once again an if-then statement. So I will have an arrow. But I'm also noticing that it has the word not in it. So that means I'm going to have to do one of those negations. And the next one says he will pass the test. So there's no negation there. So if then, I'll put my arrow. So if the test is not easy, so that's P. If it's not easy, then he will pass the test, which is R. So if it's not easy, then he will pass the test. Good going, Sam. Then it says the test is easy if Sam studies. So this is kind of weird because if you remember it, most of the time, well, not most of the time, but all the time, the definition of the hypothesis is it comes after the word if, and the conclusion is what comes after the word then. But this time, the word if actually happens halfway through it, which kind of throws a monkey wrench in things. If Sam studies, that means that this is actually the hypothesis because it comes after the word if. But once again, it is going to be an if-then statement. It doesn't say the word then, but it definitely has the word if. So if Sam studies, which is Q, then what happens? Then the test is easy. So the test is easy if Sam studies, right? So if Sam studies, that means the test is going to be easy. That's what that's saying. They're logically equivalent. So even though it's not written as an if-then statement, you know, it doesn't say it has to be. It just says write each sentence in symbolic form. So if you wanted, you could write it the other way. If Sam studies, then the test is easy. So if you want to think about it like that, you can. If you were to rewrite it as an if-then statement, because right now it's technically not, it does not say if-then, but because the if is attached to Sam studies, the if has to stay with the Sam studies. Same thing happens here, right there. If Sam doesn't study, that's what the if is. So this is once again going to be an if-then statement. And it says if Sam doesn't study. So this is going to be my tilde. Does not study. Does not study. So not Q. If Sam does not study, then Sam will not pass the test. So once again, I'm going to have my tilde. So not pass the test, not pass the test. So that's not R. Okay, I would just pause, see if you can do 36, and then unpause and see if you got it right. Here it says, if the test is easy. So if the test is easy would be if P. If P, then what? Sam passes the test, which is R. And there you go, that's it. The next part is translations again. In the problems below, symbols are assigned to represent statements. So J is for jog, D is for diet, G is for feel well or feel good, I don't know. H is hungry. And all of them are like I am. There's none saying I'm not jogging, I'm not dieting. So all of these are just like, yes, it is happening. I am jogging, I am dieting kind of stuff. So for each symbolic, write out the conditional statement. JG, so that's like if I jog, then I feel well. And then I'm just gonna write that down. If I jog, then I feel well. This one says not G. So G is I feel well. You'll just write I do not feel well. But you know, all of these are conditional, so they all have to start with the word if. So not G, I do not feel well. Then what happens? J, which is I jog. There we go. So maybe I'll do it in a different color. Like I said, these are all conditionals, so all of them will have an if-then, like that. You just have to fill in the other parts based on these. So this is like not D and not H. So this will be like not diet and not hungry. You just have to write that into a sentence. So like if I don't diet, then not hungry, so I don't get hungry. And that would be how it is. So if I don't diet, then I don't get hungry. There you go. Lastly, write a valid conclusion for the following statements, then give the reason. So it does say to give the reason, law, syllogism, or detachment, and if no valid conclusion exists, write none. So for every single one of these things, there's three things that could happen. It's the law of syllogism, it's the law of detachment, or it's neither. So your answer, you're going to write down what the conclusion is if there is one, and then you have to label it law of syllogism, law of detachment, or, you know, if there is no conclusion, you write none. So just as a reminder, the law of syllogism is the one that is the longest one. It's one where it says if P happens, then Q happens. If Q happens, then R happens. So if P happens, then that means R is eventually going to have to happen. That is the law of syllogism. The law of detachment is the one that says if P, then Q. And if P actually happens, that means Q actually has to happen. So if this happens, then that happens. Then you say, hey, guess what? That first thing did actually happen. So that means that the second thing has to happen. Anything else is not going to be a law we're using. So if I eat a pretzel, then I get thirsty. I eat pretzels. So if I was to use letters that are not P and Q, because Honestly, I don't like using P and Q. I like using letters that represent what they're saying. So if I eat pretzels, P for pretzels. If I eat pretzels, then I get thirsty. I'll put a T for thirsty. So if I eat pretzels, then I get thirsty. The next thing says, you know, it's a completely different sentence. I eat pretzels, which is P. So does this match any of these? Well, yes. The whole thing is that these two first things are supposed to match. So that means my little therefore kind of thing is just going to be T for thirsty. So I get thirsty. So therefore, I get thirsty. Period. Like that. So that is one way to do it. You can put it into symbols and see if the symbols match one of these two exactly. Like I said, that one's law of detachment, so I'll write detachment. But there is another way that you can do this, because sometimes people just confuse, like, well, which one is which? How do I know if I'm looking at syllogism or detachment? And one way you can think about it is like this. With the law of syllogism, you have two if-then statements. So you can go through all of these questions one by one and just say, hey, does it have two if-then statements? If so, then it's syllogism or bust. If you go through it and you have one if-then and then a statement, then it's going to be detachment or nothing. So that is another way to think about it. So just to show you, like the number 41 says, if I run, then I get tired. If I go to school, then I walk. So those are two if-then statements. Two if-then. That means it is either syllogism or nothing. I don't know which because I haven't read it, but it's the syllogism or nothing, because syllogism is the one that has two if-thens. This is an if-then. That second one is not an if-then. So this one has to be a detachment or nothing, because syllogism has two if-thens. Maybe I'll write this a little further down. And this is if-then, if-then. So it's two if-then statements. So it's syllogism or nothing. So that's one way to kind of narrow it down. So you can just memorize that syllogism is two if-then statements. Otherwise, it could be detachment. And then you go through and say, does it match? Because for syllogism, the thing about syllogism is that the two middle things have to be the same. Syllogism, the two middle things have to be the same, right? If P, then Q. If you write horizontally, if P, then Q, if Q, then R, right? So the two middle things have to be the same. So I just read it. If I get tired, I go to school. Those two things are not the same thing. So this is none. If I went to the next law of syllogism, if I learn math, then I will feel successful. So once again, I would just check to see if the two middle things are the same. I feel successful, I feel successful, ding, 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 ding. This one is going to be the law of syllogism. So I'll just write a little note over here. It is the law of syllogism. And all you have to do is write the part that is left over. And that is your conclusion. So if I learn math, comma, then I throw a party. Okay. Lastly, this one, law of detachment or not. In law of detachment, the first things have to match. So not the middles, because there is no middle. The first things should match. So this first thing should match this first thing. And either they're the same or they're not. So this says the moon is full, this says the wolves come out. Those are not the same, so this is going to be none. You could only make a conclusion if this said the moon is full as well. If the moon is full, the wolves come out. The moon is full, then you could say the wolves come out. But the first two things have to match. Right? There you go. The first things have to match, right? Okay. So that's it for the review guide. Hope you found this helpful. And that's it. All right, have a good one.